Doris, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
First, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into your career?
I'm currently with North Carolina State University. I'm with the communications department. I teach public speaking. I teach intercultural and international communication. I teach several other communication courses like conflict transformation, conflict management, social media, media technology, and all of those fun stuff. My research is heavily on conflict transformation, but I'm always looking at the peace building aspect of it. So holistically, I would say that I just love to go into spaces. It could be organizations, it could be in an individual lives, it could be in an institution like government, and just try to see how I can transform those conflicts. So just taking those conflicts and transforming it, making light of those conflicts and seeing how we can make it better going forward. So that's a little bit of what I've done. And in the past, I've worked with several populations. I've worked with organizations, nonprofit here in the Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina area. I've worked internationally with terrorist survivors. I've worked with women-based organization. In fact, I am currently working with women-based organization right now for a recent research I'm working on. And it's just women-based organization and women in Africa who are experiencing conflict and how we're navigating that space. But interestingly, we're looking at how, they are using digital media and they are transforming conflict online and bringing peace-building approaches to it. So just see me as someone that loves to just go into wherever there's a conflict situation and just trying to make light of it and say, hey guys, we don't need to fight. We don't need to do crazy things to ourselves. Let's just see how we can make it better. And that's where I come in. Thank you.
It's really great. Is there anything else that you can tell us about your journey in becoming a communications expert and how your early experiences and passion for communication shaped your career path?
Yes, that's a beautiful question. I like to think of my journey as a very interesting one. So from a very young age, I just enjoyed communicating. I remember just being that little girl who will always, communicate and, just keep talking. And it was interesting because I was surrounded by people who would say, oh, Doris, you talk too much. And in those moments, I would be like, wait, but that's what I love doing. And as I kept evolving, I just found myself in elementary school and in high school, being a part of a debate team, attending discussion fora in my community. And by the way, I grew up in the southwest region of Nigeria, which is in the West African area, and that was where I grew up. And I would always be among the debate team. I would always look for any opportunity to just get my words out there. But the interesting thing about communication for me was the human aspect of communication was what fascinated me the most. I was really interested in just going beyond what people are saying to how they are feeling, what's going on, what are they saying, what's the meaning behind what they're saying. And so I was more of those, deep thinker and all of that. But as I emerged, I, obviously went to college and I studied mass communication. That was the first course that kind of stood out to me based on my interest. And then I kept going with that, and it kind of exposed me to different types of areas of communication, from intercultural to organizational to persuasion to rhetoric. Like, you just see how large communication can be. But I eventually graduated with a specialty in organizational communication and persuasion from the Southern Illinois University. So it's SIU in Carbondale, Illinois. The interesting thing about just not focusing on communication is that I had a very interesting experience in 2017. Besides growing up in a conflict-affected area, back in Nigeria, when I grew up as a young child, in 2017, I noticed, or what happened to me was that a few members of my family were extincted by a terrorist group in Nigeria. And immediately that experience was like, whoa, what's happening with violence and terrorism? And because I've gone so deep in communication, my approach to resolving conflict was through a communication perspective, using my words and just, communicating from the heart. That always made me happy. So I stuck to that. Yeah, thank you.
It's really great and wonderful story. So, how do you think that conflict resolution skills can be important for young individuals, especially in the context of social media and online interactions?
That's a beautiful question. So I know I have been mentioning conflict, and even in your question right now, I can hear you ask me about conflict resolution, but most people don't really understand what conflict is. So I think it would be good before I start this question to really just define what is conflict. And when we mention that word, what does it really mean? I know conflict is inevitable, conflict is everywhere, and it's everywhere all the time, which can be scary, but which is super interesting at the same time. I like to tell people conflict is where we are right now. Like, we have conflict hanging around us right now. What's happening is that when you hear people say, I don't want to cause conflict, what they really mean is that they don't wish to bring it up in the open, but conflict is actually everywhere. And conflict is simply either people, individuals, entities, or having perceived incompatibilities or differences in their goals, their orientations, their beliefs, their values, their objectives, their ideologies. So whenever there's an incompatibility, when a person A is going a direction and person B is going another direction, there's bound to be conflict. But as soon as there's the harmony, then we're talking about, okay, we're actually not having conflict in this moment. And most people like to say peace is the opposite of conflict, but I'll say no, harmony actually is. That's why we can still have peace even in the midst of war, you know what I mean? But as long as there's that defined objective where people are coming together and it's not, destructive, then I would say that the conflict is healthy and it's good. So if I have to come back to your questions in terms of, how conflict resolution skill can be very important for young individuals, it's so beautiful, because if we can establish the fact that conflict is everywhere, it means that it's so vital and everyone should have the skills and the tools to know how to navigate that situation. For young folks, I would say that obviously it teaches us the root cause of conflict. So understanding how to navigate conflict means that you go beyond what's happening and you go into the underlying layers, underlying layers of what the conflict is. So if something happens right now in this gathering, it's not necessarily the conflict that is the problem. There is something behind that conflict that triggered that conflict and led to that conflict. So having that skills of conflict transformation or conflict management gives you that extra inner eyes to be able to dissect and say, oh, wait, what's going on? It also helps us in creating meanings and interpretation. I love this simple statement I heard from a coach of mine a few years ago. She said, nothing has meaning except the meaning we give to it. And I think that's really the basis of conflicts, because whenever there's a conflict situation, it's because there's a meaning attached to what's happening. And that's why people are agitated, people are angry, and the emotions are running high. But if we can get to a point where we can pull back the curtain and say, wait a minute, nothing really has meaning. I think there's a reason why I'm attaching meaning to this thing. And then we can go beyond, that. Another good benefit of, just having the conflict resolution skills is that it teaches us the beautiful skill of active listening. When it comes to conflict, the number one reason why we have conflict in our world is because people are not listening. And, everyone is like, oh, I'm such a good listener. And you get to realize that there is a skill to listening. There's a skill to listening actively. There are skills to listening empathetically, when you listen with so much emotional intelligence in the listening. And so listening is different from just hearing what's said. Listening is, going beyond whatever is said and just really identifying the person's needs, your needs, what they are feeling, what I'm feeling, or whoever is in the conflict situation. Just active listening is another beautiful skill. Another thing it teaches is just patience. You realize that even the 5-second or the 60-second pause can make a difference. You know, when you just want to roar and you just want to give a piece of your mind, that little pause it's just a skill of patience. You're like, wait. And it's interesting because as a parent, I'm like, I pride myself, oh, I'm patient. But the next minute something happens, I'm like, I'm losing my patience, you know? It's just so amazing how we keep going through this circle of learning. Another thing is that conflict transformation skills actually teaches us a lot about open communication. I think even in the workplace, in organizations, you realize that organizations with a very high open communication strategy, they have a way of just making things work for them. Conflict might be there, no doubt, but they have a way of managing it. They have a way of preventing it before it happens and eventually transforming it. Another is that it also teaches us a lot about assertiveness instead of being passively aggressive. You can still, pass your point across. You can still share your ideas in a very assertive way, in a very direct way, without being disrespectful, without being rude, without being, the negative ways that most individuals would gravitate towards. Another beautiful thing I've noticed that I've learned about conflict transformation skills is that it sparks creativity and innovation. It's so interesting how you could realize that you're getting into a conflict with someone and it just identifies something you never knew that was there about you or about the person. And that immediately opens an idea to, oh my God, this is a problem. I can actually fix this problem. I can meet this need. And however we go about meeting those needs, whatever strategies we choose to meeting those needs, we realize that we're actually being creative and innovative in the long run while we're doing that. Another beautiful thing that I love to do is that I love to highlight that so long as we're living in a global world, we're always meeting people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different traditions. We will always get to that point where knowing how to resolve conflict would help us attain intercultural competence. The more we engage with different cultures, the more we dialogue with different cultures, we'll realize that we're becoming competent and at understanding the differences that we all embrace in our world today. I think it's weird when you see a group of people who look alike just staying together. The world is global. We're talking about the online world today where we're meeting people from different places all around the world. We just need to know how to become intercultural competence, and just learning about conflict and resolution would help in getting that as well. And a beautiful thing is that it also leads to peace building in the long run. And when we learn these skills and when we know the skills, we can carry it with us wherever we go, either in our classrooms or online or in our living room with our parents, whatever the case may be. It just helps us, navigate the world of peace building, especially when we come in contact with people in different spaces. So these are just a few tips of what conflict transformation skill could really do to individuals or for individuals. And the beautiful thing about the online world or the online interactions is that, yes, we're meeting people from different cultures, but the e-contact is actually happening. And just having those conflict resolution skills can help us to get into a healthy dialogue. There's this concept called online dialogue, where even in the responding to a post on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or whatever the case may be, we're actually listening to whatever someone is saying and not being in a hurry to just, give out a piece of our mind or just put our thought there. And, I've been going through the comment section. It's interesting because when I go online and I see a post, the first thing I do is to read the comments. And I'm just like, what's really happening? The world is toxic. Like, people are angry. And it's simply because people are not also practicing the listening skills even while they're on that platform. So these are just skills that once you have them, you're able to just navigate the situation no matter where you find yourself. And I hope that helps. Thank you.
Some wonderful points there.
Yeah.
So Could you share a personal experience or example of how effective conflict resolution skills have helped you navigate challenges in your own life, whether it be school, online, or just within your community?
Yes. Ooh, I love this question so well. I think people go with the illusion or with the myth that the moment you say you're a conflict expert or communication expert, it means you don't have conflict in your life. I'm like, no, I experience conflict every day. And in fact, it's because I take those conflict as a tool. That's why I'm able to like walk it around. I'm thinking now about what happened. I think it was when I was back at UNCG, which is in University of North Carolina, Greensboro. I was an instructor, and I was teaching a public speaking course. And it was very interesting because I give my feedback in the moment. So as soon as students finish giving their speeches or their presentation, we do a little bit of feedback time where they're receiving peer feedback and they're also getting feedback from me. And in those moments, I gave my feedback in the classroom and I thought, I did a good job. I was done. The professor is done. Everything is looking all well. And I went back to my office that afternoon, and a student just came into my office really angry, like really upset, yelling and screaming. It was such a scene. I was like, what's happening? How can I help? And apparently the student wasn't happy or satisfied with the feedback. And in those moments of offering feedback, it was obvious that the student perceived the feedback as a critic and didn't feel seen or heard in that moment. And when we're in class, we're working with time, we've got to finish up. So I'm sure I was wrapping up with everything without noticing that student actually felt unseen. And the student was filled with so much anger, which I understand. So when the student came to my office that afternoon, it was beautiful because while the student was just emotionally charged, the reason for just my insight or expertise in conflict management made me see the need of the student, even regardless of what the student was projecting externally. I was able to see that, oh my God, this is a student who has a need to be safe, to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel understood. So in that moment, while the student was just projecting, I was there taking note of the needs of that student internally. And it just shows that we all have needs, and most of our needs are universal. There's everyone here would say, I know what it feels like to need empathy. I know what it feels like to be seen. I know what it feels like to be heard, to be understood, to be known, to be safe. And so I just was able to identify the needs that the student was expressing. And in that moment, I offered a few suggestions of what they're feeling. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Do you feel scared? Do you feel unhappy about the situation? Do you feel ignored? So I was literally guessing some feelings in that moment. And student was like, yes, I felt this way. And yes, I felt that way. And yes, I felt that way. And immediately I was like, I see. I'm so sorry. And so it brings me back to this principle. I don't know if you've heard of it, but there's this principle in the practice of nonviolent communication. And it's a 4 principle of observations, feelings, needs, and requests. And the first thing is just observe what's happening without putting any judgment or label. And the thing about observation is people want to observe, but they also want to evaluate at the same time. In that situation, I could have said, this student is really rude. That would be a judgment. That would be an evaluation. But I chose not to say the student was rude because I don't know what the student was dealing with. But in that moment, all I could observe was this was a student who is speaking to me in a very high pitch and is using languages that I'm unfamiliar with. So you see how I'm able to identify I'm just observing what's happening rather than evaluating or judging the situation. And another thing with the principle is the principle of feelings, somewhat identifying the way we feel and just observing what the feeling is, which is different from our thoughts or different from assumptions. So when you hear people say words like, I feel like this situation is really bad. That's not a feeling, that's a thought. And we need to be able to separate the thought from the feeling. The feeling would say, I feel upset, I feel sad. Our feelings are always so pure, and it takes us to the root cause of the conflict. Rather than saying, oh, I feel like a procrastinator. No, that's a judgment. That's an assumption. That's your thought. That's not what it is. So in that moment, just identifying our feeling. Do you feel sad? Do you feel aroused? Do you feel thankful? Do you feel depressed? So just knowing how to identify your feelings would go a long way. And after feelings, just identifying the needs, which are, what are the values? What is this person seeking? What is this person longing for? In that conflict situation, it was obvious that this person was longing for understanding. This person was longing to be seen. And I was teaching a class of 30 students. For crying out loud, I can't really see everybody. But, it was obvious that this student really wanted to be seen, and I was able to identify that need. So on the line, underneath that conflict, there is a need. There is something that the person is longing towards. There's something that the person really wants to identify with. And that's very universal, because we all can, associate ourselves with things like that. And then the final thing is request. Most people know how to identify their needs. They know how to highlight their feelings, but they really don't know how to make the request. And the request is, okay, how can I help? The request is, okay, what should we do going forward? The request could be something about, okay, would you love a cup of tea, or would you love me to reflect what I've just heard you say? Just making such requests in the moment, especially requests that can be met, would go a very long way. It's interesting how people make requests, but they're actually making a demand. They want you to do something right there and right now. A request is something that, even if you get a no for an answer, at least you made that request. And so just going through that principle could be a very good way to just navigate the challenges of conflict in our lives. And this can also be applied online, especially listening, and especially when you hear people post a particular thing and you hear or you see a comment that is quite triggering, just ask yourself, oh my gosh, what is this person feeling in this moment? And what do they really need? Some people who come online to give hate speech and are quite toxic, these people are in need of connection. It's just the truth. They really need community. They need connection. And since they don't have it, they just seek for several other strategies to meeting those needs, even though the strategies are not healthy. So these are just a few suggestions or principles of how we can resolve conflict amicably in any situation we find ourselves. Yeah.
It's really great. Really great. So, as a young person, what are some ways that you believe young individuals can use communication and conflict transformation techniques to create a more positive and inclusive online environment, given the prevalence of social media in our everyday lives?
That's a good one. I love that you started by saying as a young person, because yes, I am young. I'm a millennial, and it's amazing how it's just so amazing how the same social media that bring about the whole conflict, and we see a lot of hate speech, is the same platform that could be used to create beautiful experiences. And I think for a young person, just getting your priorities straight or right, or having a clear priority would help you know, what am I doing in this space online? What do I want to get from this space? There's so many social media apps right now in our world, like thousands or millions of them, if I would say. But as a young person, if you can know that, okay, this is my North Star, this is where I want to go to, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to be, you could go on those social media platforms and seek communities that helps you, or communities that draws you closer to that North Star of yours. Setting very clear priorities will help in terms of, when I'm on this media platform, what do I want to achieve? What is the end goal? It's also another strategy, questions we can ask ourselves. Another question could be, just identifying or defining what your highest values are. You could ask yourself, what do I value? What do I really want? It's the social media space it's amazing because it's almost like a web. It's like you don't even know where to start, you don't know where to end. And it's so sad when I see young folks who just go in there and just get caught up with whatever is happening. What that highlights is that they don't have their priorities straight, and their values are probably they're not clear enough, and they're not well defined. So a very beautiful way, an approach to do that will just be sitting with yourself to say, okay, in this season of my life, what do I need? If this season all you want to do is to be creative and to be a TikToker, or to come up with innovative ideas, ask yourself, now I'm on the social media, what platforms can I go to so that I can be able to get those inspirations for what I need in this season? So I think that's where it comes to play. And then what that does is, in the long run, it keeps us closer to our dreams. It keeps us in close proximity to what we desire. That's the thing. And we're not caught up with the whole insult and toxicity and all of that, but rather we're caught up with inspirations and ideas. And for example, YouTube, just imagine going on YouTube and typing anything, you would find millions of answers. So even YouTube could also be a very good source to say, okay, what do I really need from this place? Just identifying a very clear objective of what you need is a way you can create an inclusive environment online. Another that I think I mentioned earlier is about online dialogue. When we talk about dialogue, most people think dialogue is, oh my gosh, you bring person A and I bring person B and we sit down together and we're having the back and forth conversation, and that's a dialogue. No, it doesn't really apply that way in the online world. The way dialogue applies online is just taking turns in your feedback, taking turns in your comment. When you hear something or you see something, before you respond to it, there's that, okay, acknowledging what the person has said, and then adding to what you're going to say in order to create that inclusivity. Another thing is just understanding that, when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at changes. I can't really say that enough. I see most people on social media, and it's very interesting how the thing that could be considered bad, actually, if we change the way we look at it, it's actually good. It's good because in the long run, it's all about what is this person trying to do and what can I learn, even if it's from their mistakes or even if it's from whatever the case may be. So in terms of just creating, like you said earlier, just ways young people can use communication is just listening and taking turns, listening, being, I wouldn't use the word respectful because respectful can be quite relative. It depends on the culture. Understanding that all we know is not all there is to know. And there are several reasons that this person or whoever we're interacting with online is coming with. So acknowledging that we're coming with different things and different factors are influencing those communication dynamics plays a long run and, plays a long role in how we communicate in the long run. Yeah.
Really great. Really great. So your work involves exploring the role of digital technology in conflict and terrorism. What advice would you give to young people who are interested in using digital platforms for positive change and conflict transformation while also staying safe and responsible online?
That's a good question. So far, so good. My work on exploring terrorism has actually exposed me to a lot of literatures on cyber terrorism. And we see a lot of young people who, yes, they are digitally savvy, especially in this era, but they still need some digital literacy, I would say, and just knowing how to be safe in an online space. Not all communities are communities to belong to, especially if that's not what you're aligning yourself with. And no one wants to fall victim to most of these communities. So a good way to just establish things online is to just ask yourself, okay, if I want to get involved in whatever platform I'm getting involved in, what are the values or the missions or the objectives or the purpose of that community? Asking yourself that question. In fact, you can do a little bit of research, going online, looking up that community and just asking yourself, what are their missions? What are their objectives? And then also keeping alert to the images and graphics that we expose ourselves to. Because sometimes in belonging to a particular community or getting some clicks could make one's, account act and all of that. So all of this is just to say, just be cyber security aware that there are different ways that most people get hacked or most people get unsafe online, where their informations are being misrepresented or are being used for different falsification purposes. So a good way to just go about that is not to share your personal information. This looks like they're very tiny little tip, but they go a long way, because it's the folks on the other side can be quite crafty when it comes to, making youth and young people feel unsafe online. Not sharing your personal information would be a very good one. And personal information could involve maybe your social security number, your personal your password, your banking information, your address, keeping all of those things personal. That's why it's called personal, right? It's funny how even when you go to people's social media account, you see the address, you see the name, you see the phone number. You want to just refrain from things like that so that you can be safe and your digital footprint cannot be easily traced in a negative light. Another beautiful way to just go about it is just making sure that when you're using this internet or the Wi-Fi, you're making sure that it's secure, the password is safe, you're not. Most of these things also comes with some tips and incentives and offers. I just want to make the young people feel a part of it. So I think that's one thing that I would say young people should be aware of. My previous work on terrorism groups in Africa would show, or even in Africa generally, because I looked at the eastern and the west side of Africa. It's interesting how terrorist groups are actually always targeting the youth. And they're targeting youths who are unemployed. They're targeting youths who feel unsafe in their families, who are currently going through a season. And so they promise them lots of incentives like, oh, when you come join us, we'll recruit you and we'll give you this, we'll give you that. All of these fat bonuses and incentives are actually what terrorist groups use to attract young folks. And over again, we've seen how they've actually been successful at doing that. And a good way to go about this is that when you find out that you're being asked to come on board and the incentives looks good, so good to be true, check in with someone. I really love the TMN platform, which is, we have folks around who can serve as a guide and a mentor, and check in with them. Oh, is this a safe thing? Is this something to do? Put a phone call through to the organization, make some questions, ask questions, make lots of inquiries. That would be a good way to navigate that situation and keep staying safe online. Also, just knowing who you chat with. I know in a world where we live in, it can be quite lonely. A lot of youth are actually experiencing lots of mental health crisis and situation, given the influx of information that is surrounding them right now. But just noticing that whoever stranger you're chatting with, just avoid personal information and then try to verify. There's so many verifying agencies or apps that you could use to track and know that, okay, is this source credible or not? So those are just a little tip on how to, navigate the whole world of cybersecurity and cyber safety. But in the long run, especially when we think about being global citizens or digital citizens, the best thing is just that leverage communities that just takes you closer to your North Star. I think I mentioned that earlier. That's a good way to go about this. There's a community called Solia. It's SOLIYA. And what they do is they really train young people on how to, have dialogues online and how to, it's actually an established institution that any young folks might want to reach out to and just, get involved if you want to use that platform. There's another platform called the peer-to-peer university learning. It's P2P university learning. You can look that up. I came up with some course curriculum and stuff and redesigning that platform with them. Those are learning circles and those are learning communities. So no matter where you are in the world, you can interact with people in different learning circles and learning communities based on the subject you're interested in doing. In fact, the beautiful thing is that you can even lead a learning circle, and we'll have people around the world who are interested in that. They'll key into it. You have meetings, and it's just a beautiful way to keep growing together. I think having those close-knitted communities helps keep the distractions away and then move you closer to your North Star in the long run. Yeah.
Really great. Really great. So you're actively involved in various initiatives to support vulnerable individuals and communities. What opportunities do you see for young people to get involved and make a positive impact in their own communities? And how can they start on this path of service and leadership?
Yes. Ooh, this is the amazing one. I love it. I love it because there's this buzzword where people use, I know it's becoming more like a cliche, but it's the truth. I think they say think globally, act locally. It's just the way people say, like, act locally, but then you're thinking globally. There's so many opportunities for young folks to be involved in leadership, in communities, in service. Before a young person gets involved in any form of service, my question to the young person is, what are you interested in? What are your interests? Identifying what your interests is or are is the first step to really knowing which communities do I get involved in, or which service do I give, or which part do I become a leader. Just identifying that interest. And an interest of yours could just be, oh, I love it when my environment is clean. That just gives you that, oh, that's an environmental focus, just as tiny little thing as that. Oh, I love it when I draw. That tells you that, oh, there's a community for, artists and all of that. So identifying your interests first is the first step to go. But there are different ways you can go about leading. We live in an online world today, again, back to the online world, where you can start up a YouTube channel. It's not hard. You can start up a podcast. But before you even go into that, when you identify what you're interested in or what your interests are, look around your communities and ask yourself, where within my communities are these interests being met, or are they being served? And sometimes you realize that you're interested in some things that have not even been taught about by anyone around you. And so that's not an opportunity to say, okay, I'll just serve anywhere. No, don't do that. Rather, ask yourself, okay, that means there is a need here. It means my community needs something like this. And so be the first person, be the pioneer, be the first to tell yourself, okay, I will start up a podcast to talk about some of the needs within my communities that I'm identifying, and there is no solution. If you have any folks out there who wants to come and be a part of this, let's do it. So what this is just highlighting to us is that there's so many needs that are yet to be solved. And you don't have to wait until someone else has done that before you can be a part of that. You can start that yourself. The beautiful thing about another opportunity that I came across quite recently, which is beautiful, is the United Nations, who are seeking for youth who are leveraging technologies. So that's a new policy and a new initiative they're working on right now. And it's called the Social Entrepreneurship Opportunity. And they're really seeking young folks who are leveraging opportunities and technologies in any way they can. And they just actually want these young folks to be able to come, submit a proposal to them, tell them this is what's happening around me. They will support you. They will give you the grants. They would, you would get, so that's just one organization that's doing that. And you can always, like I said, start your podcast, check out the needs around you and try to create ways to meet those needs. Reach out to different organizations and ask them to support you in terms of meeting those needs, and volunteer in an already established organization or community if you feel that that's where your needs will be met. And so there's several areas, but everything all comes down to what are your interests? What are you interested in? And I also just want to put it out there that your interest varies. What you might be interested in today might be different from what you'll be interested in the next year. So just keeping inventory of some of those interests as they evolve would also help shape where you position yourself in the long run.
Great, just great.
Yeah.
So, as someone deeply involved in conflict transformation and communication, what advice would you give to the Teens Media Network in fostering a positive and conflict-free creative environment benefiting both the young individuals producing content and the young audience that they aim to reach?
I love that. Several ideas. Okay. Maybe I have a couple. I would list some of them.
Go ahead.
I mentioned earlier about open communication. It would be beautiful if all organizations, just like the TMN, has an open communication culture. You want to be able to express things directly to the person who would fix the problem. There's this thing happening in organizations or some organization where you find out that everyone else knows what the problem is except the person who can fix the problem. And I'm like, you're not going to get the problem solved. And so it's very interesting because creating an open communication really, really helps. Research has shown that open communication in the workplace is highly needed in our time and era right now. And 86% of respondents in a particular research that came out recently showed that they blamed the lack of cooperation or the lack of communication to being the reason for the failures in the organization. So how do we create this open communication, which should be the next question? It's just basically just sharing the information between the people in a very transparent, honest, consistent, and dependable manner, or a dependable way. So when you express your thoughts clearly amongst ourselves within the organizations, you express your emotions, something happens and like, oh, when you said that, I kind of felt triggered, or when you said that, it made me think about this. So expressing that openly will just help save a lot, and doing so also in a good way that doesn't, highlight disrespect or differences within cultures or traditions or beliefs or ideologies. And a good way to also have an open communication is this term. I think it was Brené Brown that named it Rumble. She called it Rumble. And Rumble means just having conversations or discussions committed to leaning into vulnerability. So when organization sees that vulnerability is not weakness, what it does is it just strengthens everyone. You get to realize that in that moment, people stay curious, people are generous, regardless of the messy situations, people are willing to take a break and come back to resolving the conflict. And that's another thing to highlight. Not all conflicts should be solved immediately. There's some conflict that all we need to do is just to take a break, think about it, and then come back to it. And the moment you come back to the conflict, you realize that, wait, I don't really feel as emotionally charged as I was when it initially happened. And then another beautiful thing about an open communication culture within an organization is just to normalize giving and receiving feedback. And I think that's something that is under prioritized, but it should be where, instead of doing the annual reviews or the quarterly reviews, you could make it a weekly review where you're constantly giving yourself feedback, and it's okay to fail gracefully. That's another thing, a culture that embraces failures, a culture that just sees how people or the co-workers or teens are learning and making mistakes and trying again and trying again. The culture will be very adaptive. It will be a culture where everyone wants to belong to. And just learning from our experience is also another. Another point worth highlighting is just, designing an annual or a biannual or a quarterly training for teams and for leaders within an organization will help. A training like a conflict transformation. And I know you guys do that. So, because I watched the YouTube videos and I was like, this is awesome. And so it was beautiful to just see the training, the conversations, the communication, all of those content are not just to just listen to. They're just something to listen and apply daily. And you realize that in the long run, it begins to shape the culture of the organization. Another thing I've done for other organizations is just creating a dispute system design, setting up a dispute system design within I feel like every organization should have that, where it's a system that puts in place how to identify, how to design, how to employ or evaluate any form of conflict that arises. So when a conflict arises, everyone knows, oh, we need to go and meet this person, or this is the next step to take when that arises. Another final feedback or advice I would highlight would be just taking everybody, either the employees or the stakeholders, depending on who are the key leaders involved in the organization, taking a personality assessment test is something that would help. Because we're all coming from different backgrounds and we all have different personalities. So just having a dispute system design would help. A personality test would help. And also creating annual mentorship. And then the idea of rumbling is also something else that I believe would make a difference in the long run.
So given your experience, how do you see the Teens Media Network contributing to the development of conflict resolution and communication skills among its young members? And what potential challenges do you anticipate in creating content that will resonate and positively impact the TMN audience?
This question brings me to the idea of diversity, inclusion, equity, and access. It does, because even in the world of creating content, there's still some people that are going to be excluded depending on what we're creating. And so a way to manage that is just being interculturally competent and just knowing that, okay, this content that I'm creating or I'm putting out there, how inclusive is it of everyone? Is it marginalizing? Is it including everyone? Is it a content that could embrace diversity and differences? Or is it a content that would just, focus on one particular group and ignore the other? So it just depends on what the focus and the mission of TMN is. That's what's coming to mind, especially for young audience. Most people think content creation is just about, okay, I have something to say, I'm just going to put it out there. No, it's not. Whatever you have to say, how is it going to create an inclusive community? How is it going to create a community where no one feels isolated? How is it going to be aware of people's backgrounds and heterogeneous locations? There's just so many different factors that could play, or that comes to play when we think about inclusivity and diversity and equity and access. Access is also another thing that would be what I lighten, which is based on this content that is being created, who has access to it? And I know we've been talking about online and digital media and all of that, but some people might not have access to the internet, or some people might not have access to digital devices that would get them to that content or make them have the information that they need. So a beautiful way to just manage any possible arising conflicts that may arise in terms of, when, or challenges when we create content on the TMN platform, is just setting the goals or the objective straight up front and just saying, this is the purpose for this, so that everyone who is immersing themselves in whatever content that is being produced get to understand that, oh, the fact that a particular item wasn't mentioned doesn't mean that they're excluded. It just means that that's the focus for that time. And just seeing how this focus can be um, dynamic in terms of its application, in terms of how it relates to everyone without necessarily isolating everyone. And again, it just brings me back to the real root cause of conflict. People feel isolated, people feel alienated, and that's why they're having conflict. And the moment whatever content we produce creates some sort of inclusion, I think it just reduces the chances for conflict in the long run. There's something very powerful about representation. And I think it's very powerful because within the TMN network, which is the Teens Media Network, what drives the change and inclusion in everyone is that people are able to see different kinds of representation. And what do I mean by that? It should be such that it's, again, we're talking about diversity, where it's bringing in different people from different backgrounds. It's bringing in different people from different cultures, different racial groups, different class groups. So think about the whole social construct like race and class and age and gender, sexuality, just making sure that there is representation. And I would speak for an example. When I came to my department and I realized that I was the only first African, in quote, I really didn't feel safe. It didn't mean that the department was bad. No, it meant that I wanted some form of representation. You know what I mean? And so that representation is actually what keeps us at bay. We're like, oh, okay, now this makes me feel better. Because the last thing we want to identify is just being very comfortable with the unknown. And the moment you're able to see someone that, oh, that person is experiencing what I'm experiencing, oh, that person is going through what I'm going through, it just creates this ease and safety. And then up until when, we started having more Black representations in my organization, I was like, oh yes, now I'm feeling on top of my game. Nothing changed. All I wanted was representation. So you can imagine if I had stayed long enough in that department and there was nothing of such, what would happen is at some point, either conflicts might arise, or I would feel I'm not a part of this group, or I feel I don't belong, or I would leave, and all of those things that happen. But again, one of the challenges is when there's lack of representation, challenges would definitely arise. So while we're seeking more youth to be a part of the TMN's network, let's seek for more youth that represents different cultures, Hispanics, African Americans, Africans, Caucasians, like bringing in so that people can see, because it's so powerful. It's really underrated, but representation does a lot of good and and the same thing with audience too. The kinds of language we speak, how aware are we that we have different people who might not understand it, and how inclusive should our language be when we're using them? It all comes down to the whole diversity, inclusion, and equity and access. Especially in an intercultural encounter, especially since that's what the world is becoming right now. Where we're having more people traveling, and it's just like we just need that representation. We need it. I think it does a lot of good than harm when we have lots of representation amongst our groups. Yeah.
Really great. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have for you today. Thank you so much.
Okay, we ran through that. Okay, I thought there were more. Okay. Thank you so much.